Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a well-known and respected author from Seattle, USA, Mr. Ben Hawken. Ben, welcome to the show.
Ashutosh, thanks for having me. I'm a big fan. I've been looking forward to this for weeks.
Thank you so much. Ben is the author of a book titled Chandelier. So, Ben, before we start talking about your book, you've been a creator of several video series before writing Chandelier. How did the transition from video storytelling to novel writing unfold?
I'd say the biggest impact of how is how all I'd say the biggest impact is how visual the storytelling is. There is an overemphasis, you might say, in my book in describing how things look,
Mm,
and perhaps to the detriment of the other senses I could be using to
mm,
tell some of that story or describe a scene. But I'd say, in terms of it being very visual and describing everything and sometimes minute detail, the other big impact I think is in terms of how I think about getting in and out of scenes, so that every chapter or every scene in the book ends with something considerable happening or something being said in just the right way. Which
mm,
I think a fair critique is that not every chapter has to end with something huge happening or getting the perfect button put on it just right. But I think I
mm.
just can't help myself.
Amazing.
And then I'd say the third way that a career in video production has informed the writing is the way that I think in terms of cuts and the way that a video editor might think of, we're going to get into the scene here and we're going to get back out of it here, and
Mm,
how something concludes right now is going to have this ripple effect, so that
mm,
3 scenes from now things are going to be different, and there'll be this will still be on people's minds when they get here, and it's going to inform how they reach the next part of the book.
mm.
So these are all things that help making the move from the screen into the books a lot easier, and I think it helped a lot of what I was doing. And it also was helpful that I've never written a script that was just the right amount of length on the first try. I always was writing them
Mm,
way too long and then having to boil things down considerably.
mm.
So it was nice to be able to not have that problem when it's just you and an empty Google document and you can just keep writing forever. That part was great.
Fascinating. What a great response. Thank you. You've also spoken about sustaining momentum during long creative projects. What personal strategies helped you stay disciplined while writing a 500 plus page book?
Right. One of the things that helped the momentum stay as high as it needed to be to sustain that much writing for that long, and also to keep the story vibrant and interesting along the way, was that I tried to keep the path that I was taking with the book as loose as possible. And that doesn't
Hmm.
mean that, and also as spontaneous as possible. And that doesn't mean that I was just randomly killing off a character or that, aliens would appear out of nowhere. But it meant that it was spontaneous in that if I had a new idea or a good idea, there was a place for it to go. I
Hmm.
think if I had come up with an outline, which I did have an outline in advance, but if this was the type of outline that had every detail charted out and everything was set in concrete at a very early stage,
Hmm.
just writing all of that out in just kind of like step one, step two, step three, that would have started to feel a lot more like work.
Hmm.
And instead now, every time I sat down, because I had a looser structure, if something really out of nowhere popped up, there was a place that could fit within reason into the world that I was trying to build along the way. And
Hmm.
I'd say the second thing that kept that momentum high is that I never put myself in a position where the story could only keep growing if I was right here in my room in front of the computer.
Hmm.
Instead, I had the document always open on one tab on my computer, but then I also had it open on my phone. So if I was at the post office or walking to pick my kid up from school or in traffic somewhere, and I had an idea, it could start going directly into the story and I could keep building it
Hmm.
there. And so for that reason, it was never like, oh, I got to go sit down and stop my whole day and I got to like drag myself in to start working again. I could always be adding things to it. And I
Hmm.
think that kept the energy high as well because it
Fascinating.
caught me in a lot of different scenarios and a lot of different times in my life. And that really translated well onto the page.
Fascinating. That's some great tips for people who are aspiring authors or who are probably suffering from writer's block now. But one more question, and then I want to move to your book. Many authors struggle with authenticity in their writing.
Mhm.
What have been your guiding principles for keeping your creative voice genuine?
I think having authentic conversations is something that is in the power of every writer if they can. And I think that's true no matter how experienced they are or what type of writing they're familiar with doing. And it's really a matter of replaying in your head what was the last tense conversation that you had, or what was the last emotionally fraught conversation that you had with someone. And then can you go back in your mind and write down word for word what happened? Not a summary of what happened, but word for word what happened. Where did someone breathe really hard? Where did someone rock back on their feet and roll their eyes and have to like compose themselves again? And now use that as a spine
Hmm.
for the conversation that's going to be happening in your book.
Hmm.
Change the people, change the events, change the topics, but can you follow all of those beats? And then as you're doing it, can you have the empathy to put yourself first person in that conversation, and can you
Hmm.
and then think of what are your natural reactions, what are your
Hmm.
authentic reactions to what's being said, and then
Hmm.
turn around and do it for the other person,
Hmm.
and wait until you get to the third or fourth time before you start trying to make it sound pretty or have people saying perfectly phrased things, or never do that, because most conversations that we have don't sound like a Winston Churchill speech, that not every word is in the exact right place, and that jaggedness, that roughness to it is what's going to make it sound real.
Very interesting. Ben, let's now move to your book, Chandelier. And I'm going to ask all our viewers and listeners to check out Ben Hawken's book. Tell me about your book and what was the spark or the first image that inspired the book?
I think my story, to answer your question there, is going to be very relatable to a lot of people. I
Mm.
got home from a concert at 2 in the morning. I'd gone out and eaten with my friends after, and I was so full I couldn't fall asleep yet. So I was laying on my couch before I went upstairs to go to bed and just scrolling through, like we all do, scrolling
Mm.
through conspiracy theory YouTube shorts very late.
Mm.
And I came across one gentleman talking about a program that he had been a part of as a kid, and a quick Wikipedia search confirmed that it was an actual program. The U.S. Senator Teddy Kennedy had
Mm.
actually been a part of the committee investigating it back in the 70s and 80s. And this program took 12-year-olds and
Mm.
used LSD to see if they could, and with the help of LSD, they tried to see if they could teach these kids to project their consciousness into the Soviet Union and read secret documents at the headquarters. And then one day, after having no results for decades, they decided to shut the program down because Congress was starting to investigate what all the money was being spent on. And I thought about that, and it occurred to me, because I had young kids at the time and still do, that somewhere a 12-year-old woke up one morning and they understood that they were the most important part of the US military.
Mhm.
And by the time they went to bed that night, they had been told, just kidding, none of this was ever real.
Mm.
And my first reaction was like, as a parent, like, how do you console that kid? How do you reconnect with that kid
Yeah.
who's gone from having the most important job in the world to now you're 12 again? And
Mm.
then as a kid, what kind of whiplash does that get you? Can
Mm.
you trust adults ever again? Can you trust yourself over ever again? And having never written a novel before, I'd been writing throughout my career as a copywriter, but never and a speechwriter, but never anything beyond 10,000 words.
Mhm.
And it suddenly occurred to me, this is a book. And I'm
Mm.
like, oh, do I have time to write a book? Damn it. What am I going to do about this? And two-thirds of the story was in my head almost
Wow.
immediately. And
Mm.
I hurried and got that down to like 45 pages of outline that I used as a loose but very helpful guide. And I deleted all the things on my phone that seemed like they were distracting, and I put all my other hobbies on pause. And this was a hobby from that
Amazing.
day forward. It was
Wow.
very busy.
What an amazing story. Your book blends science, espionage, and childhood innocence. How did you decide on the combination of these three of these themes?
I've joked in the past that my YouTube algorithm and my podcast app and my Amazon shopping cart history
Hmm.
is probably can be mapped very directly onto the themes in this book in ways
Amazing.
that might make me
Yeah.
uncomfortable if I saw
Hmm.
just how
Hmm.
predictable it all
Hmm.
was.
Hmm.
You know,
Hmm.
I'm fascinated by the way, to your point there, about the way that science and scientific principles can underscore or undergird a lot of things that about the human experience, like the way that just biochemistry, for one example,
Mm.
can present itself as traditions or cultural norms or cultural interactions, or maybe how weather patterns and language patterns can impact the way that ideas and artifacts move around the country.
Mm.
There's a
Mm.
million examples of these. One of the ones that stood out that made it into the book, for example, was in a billion years ago, there were prehistoric organisms that were evolving in certain environments, and that environment impacted the ways that the shape their body had and the shape that their brain had to
Mm.
navigate through its environment, and the way that the things it ate and the way that its body adjusted to metabolize all of this information. And what
Mm.
you end up with from tiny millions of tiny permutations is a creature that ultimately is capable of empathy, but
Mm.
it's also prone to violence. And
Mm.
it has a brain that can split the atom, but also not get past its own prejudices. And all of these incredible gifts and all these incredible limitations were things that were built originally to cope with the temperature of water in a lagoon a billion years ago.
Mm.
And hearing all that, hearing me say it like that has probably alerted all of your readers and all of your listeners. I mean, to the fact that I'm probably not a ton of fun to sit next to at
Mhm.
dinner,
Mhm. Mhm.
but it can present itself in a
Yeah.
very interesting way through the power of literature. And
Mm.
then on the childhood innocence part of it, I mean, that's something that's I think on every parent's mind, pretty regularly. Like I grew up in a pretty tough area with a that was violent, that was problematic, and we were fortunate to move when I was in grade school. But I remember hearing the term childhood innocence later on and thinking like I did not get a real heavy dose of that in the environment where I
Mm.
grew up. And
Yeah.
then when you have kids of your own, you're so excited about, or you're so interested in doing what you can to protect and to preserve that. And
Mm.
then you kind of learn, like the economist Thomas Sowell said, there's no solutions, there's just trade-offs. And
Correct.
so, how do you balance letting your kids be fully functional human beings and be out in the world versus trying to take really good care of them? And
Mm.
once again, this is something else that on its surface isn't very interesting, but through the power of literature, my book really tried to look at what are those
Yeah.
trade-offs,
Yeah.
since there are no solutions.
Very well said. You mentioned a few minutes back that when you started thinking about the book, two-thirds of the book was already in your head.
Mhm.
Did you always envision Chandelier as a sweeping multi-decade story, or did it grow as you kept writing?
No, I was hoping it could be a really interesting Facebook post and then I could get it out of my system. Like I did not need it to become this big, Ashutosh. It
It
killed me at
would
first
be
as I was
one
thinking
hell of
about
a
it. I mean,
long Facebook post.
no, I wanted it to be a very short Facebook
I know,
post.
I
I just
understand.
wanted it to be, whoa,
Yes.
wouldn't it be interesting if this happened? And
Yeah.
then it immediately jumped to
Yeah.
2,000 times that size. I mean,
Yeah.
initially, yes, the espionage part was always there. And my goal was to have that be present, but I wanted it to be a very personal family story about this
Mm.
very small family unit and the problems that they were navigating because there were all these much bigger forces at play. And the fact that it ended up encompassing the US Army, the Indian government in New Delhi, the military high command in Beijing. I mean, it's getting humongous at this point,
Mm.
but
Mm.
each of those choices was so that I could better present more context for that family to respond to, and
Mm.
to do so without even knowing of all the forces that were at work. They were still just focused on themselves at a time the world was swirling
Yeah.
around them in a way.
Yeah.
And the ride that the reader gets to take is through that process of how they navigate all that while trying to take care of themselves first and foremost, even though there's so much more swirling around them. It's a
Mm.
lot. It's a lot. I'd
Absolutely.
never,
I
but to
agree.
answer your original question, no, it was never supposed to get that big. But
Amazing.
it just happened.
Yeah, absolutely. How did you balance technical detail with making the science accessible to general readers?
Yeah, a great rule of thumb that I stumbled upon on this one is if you ever have a really complex scientific concept you need to explain to your readers, find a way to have a teacher explain it to a classroom full of 8-year-olds. I stumbled upon that one on accident, and man, was it useful. And then when I got done, I went back to it 3 or 4 more times over the course of the book in flashbacks. And I tried to present it as being hey, isn't this charming? We're doing this thing again. We're doing this callback because the banter in the classroom is really strong and it's funny, and
Mm.
the teacher keeps trying to get the class under control, and we've all been in that situation.
Yeah.
But it really was just a naked attempt at exposition dumping on my part. But to our early part of this conversation, really, really great dialogue can cover a multitude of sins when
Yeah.
it comes to that. And those ended up being parts of the book that people really liked. And it was really after the fact that they're like, I'm glad I understood what on
Mm.
earth you were talking about later, thanks
Mm.
to, you like you said, explain it like you're talking to a kid. And
Yeah.
that's what I did about four times. And
Wow.
without those four times, then the rest of the science in the book, because I really didn't want to make this into a science fiction book, even if it might have ended up there a little bit. Because I mean, I'm no good at understanding some of these like high
Correct.
energy particle physics, like, but I had to figure it out so that I could explain
Mm.
it to an 8-year-old.
Amazing. Your book also suggests both the wonder and the burden of special gifts.
Yeah.
What message are you hoping to convey about talent and responsibility?
It makes me feel so good that this is a question my book could elicit
Mm.
because I'm fascinated by the duality of things that are really
Mm.
tightly linked behind the scenes, but at maybe and have don't have but have very little resemblance to each other when looked at superficially. I mean, kind of genius and insanity is a good example of this. Where what is a genius? How do you describe a genius? Well, it's someone who has thoughts that no one has ever had. But an insane person is also someone who has thoughts that no one has ever had, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, it's a bit cliche, but you talk about love and hate. They're just the same emotions pointed in different directions. And I think that that concept of having responsibility that comes with talent is really interesting. I mean, superhero movies deal with this in a really corny way where you have
Mm.
some folksy parent talking to a child and they're like, well, son, you have gifts and someday the world's going to need you. And then you smash cut to this person as an adult,
Mm.
throwing a lizard through a building and before the credits roll. And, instead those two things that most often are cross paths in our lives, that abilities and responsibilities are a lot more prosaic. I mean, it's the
Mm.
example of snow. It's not your fault if the snow is falling, but it is your responsibility to shovel your sidewalk so no one slips and falls.
Mm.
And so I think that in this book, when there's someone who there are no superhero powers that
Yeah.
anyone possesses in this book, but there are a few key skills and abilities that um, that cause the main character to ask themselves, "Hey, if you have a special skill that can save people's lives, what level of responsibility do you
Mm.
have to
Mm.
save those lives?" And I think that if you feel trapped by that,
Mm.
which is probably a natural feeling, especially in this scenario, then if you're in bondage, then you have like several react things you can try to do to react to it. You can try to run away but that's a short-term solution.
Mm.
Escapism usually isn't a long-term solution. And the second one is you can try to cut it out and just remove it like it was a tumor, and but also doesn't seem to have a long-term solution there either. And so
Mm.
what you're left with, and what I think the corpus of human literature and spirituality have to say on this matter, is that there is some sort of inevitability when it comes to something that is needful of us. I don't want to overuse the word destined by any choice,
Mm.
by any means,
Mm.
but the phrase "the only way through" or "the only way over is to go through" comes to mind. And I think that's true on any hero's journey, that you have to
Mm.
push through your reluctance and your trepidation and your comfort of
Mm.
maintaining a status quo in order to do something important. And if I'm really, really lucky, then some of that comes through in the book.
Fascinating. Your dialogue feels very authentic and often humorous, sometimes even in tense moments. How do you craft natural dialogue?
Yeah, I thought a lot about this while I was at multiple phases during the writing process, because the dialogue that's going back and forth between any number of people, and sometimes it's three or four people in a room, and you got to be really mindful of like who's if are people winning and losing these arguments, or are the points rising and falling. And a lot of that has to do with no one is ever, their heroes and villains are something that exist, right? In
Mm.
fairy tales, right? No one's 100% good. No one's 100% bad.
Yeah.
And certainly no one ever casts themselves as the villain. It's not like, I mean, I'm really beating up on superhero movies, but only in those type of movies does someone announce themselves as the villain. And
Mm.
so the idea of having like realistic reactions to things and intense moments, if there is some kind of gallows humor in there, or someone is, I mean, we all have that friend who says the wrong thing at the wrong moment, and
Mm,
everyone else is being very serious, and someone cracks a joke, and and then everyone in the room reacts with like, "Oh, damn it, Ashutosh, don't say that right now. Like, this is
mm,
not the time."
yeah.
Those are real moments. And I
Mm,
think that if you can have those uncharacteristic, or like if you kind of have someone stay true to their character by saying the wrong thing at the wrong time,
mm,
that is very realistic. I mean, it worked for Han Solo over and over again. He's saying wild things in tense moments. And every court needs a jester, I suppose, in some way. And
mm.
it's a great opportunity to show you who people really are under the surface, what they say when stakes are high.
Fascinating. Many of your characters also carry moral ambiguity. Was that deliberate from the very beginning?
Yeah, it's actually I was thinking about that when I was about when talking about the dialogue is that no one ever casts themselves as the villain. I mean, even if we want to make this really realistic, if we think back to World War II or the Cold War or any of the regional conflicts that have played themselves out over just the last 25 years, none of those bad actors along the way ever saw themselves as the villain. They were idealists, they were optimists, they were doing terrible things, they were justifying reprehensible things, but they didn't see themselves as bad people. And a really good villain is not, as I said earlier, not going to announce themselves as the villain. I mean, our brain automatically knows that's not how people really work. And so in my book, everyone is doing the best they can with whatever situation they're in. And they have to deal with a lot of factors, though, that take into account they're doing the best job with the skills that they have, with the information they have, with what people expect them to deliver,
Mm,
with the system that they're living in.
mm,
And all four of those things can work against each other. And all four of those things can be at odds with each other at exactly the same time.
mm,
And so that's a fascinating concept that I think is underutilized in typical like I'm going to do it again superhero movies, but that's because there's a 2 hour minimum in those scenarios, and luckily I had 528 pages to do it.
Amazing.
And similarly, like there's never a point in the book where, and I did this consciously, no one ever answers a question with
Mm,
100% of what they know.
mm,
And that's probably true of all of us a little bit too. There's
yeah.
always going to be some gray area there. I mean, if our partner asks us, "Does this outfit make me look fat?" Of course, you're going to say no.
Mm,
But that can also be a lot bigger when we sometimes will not say 100% of what we know because we are trying to paint a picture of ourselves that aspires to be, we're the type of person who doesn't think about that sort of thing.
mm,
Or we're the type of person who is taking an action with well-intentioned naivete and not a deeply understood sociopathy about the effects of our choices.
mm,
Not saying everything you know can be a defense mechanism. It can be a way to lie to people. It can be a way to make yourself look good. And those are all things that are playing out amongst these characters. And it was a guessing game for me too, because it was really interesting to hear and to learn about these people based on what they admitted they knew.
amazing. Ben, I have time for two more questions. Do you see Chandelier more as a standalone novel or the beginning of a larger universe of stories?
When I got to the end, I was absolutely certain that it was completely over with. I mentioned
Mm,
I got to page 528 and I was very happy with how it ended. And still to this day, I have no idea what would happen on page 529. This one
mhm,
is completely done. And I've had readers reach out when they've heard me say that and suggest ideas for what the next one and two and three books could happen.
mm,
And I say, go ahead and take it. Go ahead and do it. Write all the fan fiction you want. But this one is completely done for me.
mm,
And I tell you, after the third or fourth rewrite, and then I narrated the audiobook as well, I was really ready to
mm,
be done. I love these characters so much, but I just can't think of what else they would do anymore.
Okay. And my last question for you, Ben, and I've seen this with myself as I write several books. Looking back, is there anything you would change about the book now that it is published?
I know that if I did one more rewrite, it would have come back with, there would be things that I would have improved upon. There would have been more layers of meaning or sincerity
Mm,
and things I could have layered in there just right.
yeah,
But that's also true if I had done two more rewrites.
correct.
And so, there's that George Lucas comment about a movie's never done. It just gets to the point in time it premieres. I know I butchered that, but it's never done. It's just
Mm.
finished. It gets to the time when it's over with.
Yeah.
And I got this book exactly to where I wanted it. I have the rare peace of mind to say that it turned out exactly the way I wanted it. And I figured I would be done writing for quite a long time
Mm.
when this one was complete. And then about halfway through the recording the audiobook, the idea for the next one came to me. And I thought, I'm not even done with an audiobook. I can't do this right now. But I got so excited to finish recording so that I could get started. And now I'm about 9 months into the next one and,
Wow.
firing away on all cylinders on that one.
Wow. Wow. And on that note, Ben, I just want to say what a fascinating conversation this has been with you. I always love talking to authors. You're clearly a brilliant storyteller because you just kept me and you will keep all my viewers and listeners absolutely engrossed in this conversation. Thank you for talking to me about so many different aspects of writing. Thank you for talking to me about so many different thoughts that went through your mind when you wrote Chandelier. And I'm looking forward to when the second baby arrives. Hopefully, that also started on the couch after a late night dinner. But I look forward to reading Chandelier and listening to your audio book in much more detail now. And all the very best for Chandelier and all the things that are going to come in future. Thank you again and
Yeah.
good luck. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.